Welcome back to Investing Talk Podcast. Today, we're going to be looking at a company that's been, making waves in the market.
Okay.
VeriSign, ticker symbol VRSN.
Right.
And you've probably heard of them. I mean, they're the folks who pretty much,
Yeah,
own the internet, or at least the .com and .net addresses we all use every day.
that's right.
Yeah, and speaking of powerful, their stock has been on a tear lately, hitting new highs,
Yeah.
attracting attention from some really big players,
Mm-hmm.
like Warren Buffett. So is VeriSign like a rocket ship ready to blast off, or are we looking at a potential bubble? I mean, that's what we're
Right.
here to explore.
Well, let's start with the recent price action. VeriSign hit a new 52-week high of $232.04.
Wow.
And that was just recently. Over the past 5 days, we've seen consistent gains and increased trading volume, which points to strong bullish sentiment in the short term.
Okay, so a lot of people are excited about VeriSign right now, but what's driving that excitement beyond just the price? I mean,
Sure.
is there something fundamentally sound about their business?
Absolutely. When you look beyond the stock price, VeriSign's financials are incredibly strong. They boast a gross profit margin of 87.58%.
87.58%.
87.58%.
Wow, that's a huge profit margin.
It is.
That definitely suggests they have a solid competitive advantage.
Oh, yeah.
What else makes them so profitable?
Well, they operate in a very unique space.
Right.
They're essentially a monopoly when it comes to .com and .net domains.
Right.
Everyone who wants to establish a website with those extensions has to go through VeriSign, which gives them immense pricing power.
So it's like owning the only bridge into a bustling city. Everyone has to pay the toll.
That's a good analogy.
So with that kind of market dominance and profitability, it's no wonder investors are interested.
Exactly. And their financial strength goes beyond just profit margins.
Okay.
Their free cash flow margins have averaged around 60% over the past 5 years.
Wow.
That means they're generating tons of cash,
Right.
which they can then use to invest in future growth, buy back shares, or pay dividends.
All good things for investors.
All good things for investors.
They sound like a well-oiled money-making machine.
Right.
And then there's the Warren Buffett factor we mentioned earlier. I mean, it's not every day that one of the world's most successful investors
Right.
puts their money into a company.
Uh-huh.
His firm, Berkshire Hathaway, bought $28.5 million worth of VeriSign shares recently.
Yeah.
And this was their second purchase of the stock this year.
Yeah. It's a big vote of confidence from a seasoned investor who's known for his long-term perspective and rigorous analysis.
Okay, so we've got strong financials, a dominant market position, and the backing of Warren Buffett.
Mm-hmm.
It's starting to sound like a pretty compelling investment case.
It is.
Are analysts also optimistic about VeriSign's future?
They are, analysts project a compound annual growth rate in revenue of about 7.76% for VeriSign going forward.
Okay.
And thanks to their share buybacks, their free cash flow per share could grow even faster, potentially reaching around 12% per year.
12% growth per year. That's impressive, especially for a company that's already as established as VeriSign.
Right.
Is there anything else contributing to this positive outlook?
Well, there's the recent agreement with ICANN.
ICANN.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That's the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers.
Right.
Basically, the global governing body for domain names.
Okay.
The new agreement allows VeriSign to raise prices for .com and .net domains starting in 2027,
Okay.
further solidifying their pricing power.
So not only do they dominate the market, but they can also increase prices.
Right.
That sounds like a pretty sweet deal for VeriSign and its shareholders.
Yes, it gives them a lot of control and predictability over their future revenue streams,
Right.
which is a big plus for investors.
With all this good news, it almost seems too good to be true.
Right.
Is there anything that could potentially derail VeriSign's success?
Well, one factor to consider is the relative strength index, or RSI, of the stock.
RSI.
Mm-hmm. The RSI is a technical indicator that measures the magnitude of recent price changes to evaluate overbought or oversold conditions
Okay.
in the price of a stock or other asset.
Okay, I've heard of the RSI, but refresh my memory. What does it tell us exactly?
Essentially, an RSI above 70 suggests that a stock might be overbought,
Okay.
meaning its price has risen too quickly and could be due for a correction.
Uh-huh.
An RSI below 30 suggests the opposite,
Okay.
an oversold condition.
So where does VeriSign stand?
Well, VeriSign's RSI currently sits at 96.
96?
96.
Wow.
Which is significantly above that 70 threshold.
Right.
This indicates that the stock might be overbought and could potentially experience a pullback
Mhm.
or consolidation in the near term.
Okay, so even though the long-term prospects look good, if the chance the stock could dip in the short term,
Uh-huh.
what should investors keep in mind given this overbought signal?
That's where understanding your own risk tolerance and investment goals becomes crucial. If you're a long-term investor who believes in VeriSign's fundamentals and are comfortable with some volatility, a potential dip could present a buying opportunity.
Hmm.
But if you're more risk-averse, it might be prudent to wait and see how things unfold.
That's a great point.
Yeah,
It all comes down to your individual investment strategy and comfort level with risk.
exactly.
So while there's a lot to be excited about with VeriSign, it's important to be aware of the potential for short-term price fluctuations.
Yeah,
But before we get into that further, let's take a quick step back and talk a bit more about VeriSign's business model.
sounds good.
We've touched on their dominance in the .com and .net space,
Mm-hmm.
but how does that actually translate into revenue? I mean, what are the specific mechanics of their business?
Well, think of it this way. Every time someone registers a new .com or .net domain name
Okay.
or renews an existing one, they're essentially paying a fee to VeriSign. It's like a recurring subscription service for having your website address.
So they're not just selling a product. They're selling a service that people need to keep paying for.
Precisely.
And with billions of websites out there
Right.
and more coming online every day, that adds up to a pretty significant revenue stream.
It does.
That makes their high profit margins even more impressive. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
they have a huge customer base that relies on their services.
Yeah.
And there's no real alternative if you want a .com or .net address.
It's a very powerful position to be in.
Okay, so now that we have a better grasp of their current business model, let's shift gears and talk about the future.
Okay.
The internet is constantly evolving with new technologies like Web3 and the metaverse emerging.
Yeah.
How could these trends impact VeriSign's business down the line?
That's a great question and one that a lot of investors are pondering right now.
Mm-hmm.
On one hand, you could argue that a decentralized internet, like what Web3 proponents envision, could potentially threaten VeriSign's centralized control over domain names.
Right, if websites and online services become more distributed across a blockchain,
Uh-huh.
the need for a single entity like VeriSign to manage domain names might diminish.
Exactly, but here's where things get interesting.
Okay,
VeriSign isn't just sitting back and watching these trends unfold.
right.
They're actively exploring these new technologies themselves.
Really?
They've even filed patents related to blockchain and domain name management.
So they're trying to get ahead of the curve and position themselves as leaders in this new digital landscape.
It seems that way.
Okay.
They're not ignoring the potential for disruption,
Right.
and their deep pockets and technical expertise could give them a significant advantage if they play their cards right.
So what does this all mean for investors? Should we be excited about VeriSign's potential in the Web3 and metaverse world?
Hmm.
Or worried that these trends will make them obsolete?
It's still early days, but I think it's a sign that VeriSign is a company that's willing to adapt and evolve.
Mhm.
They're not clinging to the past. They're looking to the future and trying to figure out how to stay relevant.
Right.
And for a company with such a dominant position in a critical piece of internet infrastructure, that's a very positive sign.
That's a great point. It shows they're not afraid to innovate and embrace new technologies.
Right.
And let's face it, the internet isn't going away anytime soon.
Hmm.
So even if Web3 takes off, people are still going to need domain names.
Precisely the way we access the internet might change,
Hmm.
but the underlying need for a system to organize and manage those addresses is likely to remain.
Right.
And that's where VeriSign comes in.
Okay.
Their expertise in managing this critical piece of internet infrastructure could be valuable even in a decentralized future.
Okay, so we've talked about the potential long-term impact of Web3 and the metaverse.
Mm-hmm.
But what about the here and now? What's the bottom line for investors looking at VeriSign today?
Mm-hmm.
Should they buy, sell, or hold?
Well, as always, it depends on your individual circumstances and risk tolerance.
Right.
But let's summarize what we know.
Okay.
VeriSign is a financially strong company with a dominant market position in a critical industry.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a history of consistent profitability and growth.
Right.
And they're actively exploring new technologies to stay ahead of the curve.
Right.
On top of that, they've got the backing of Warren Buffett,
Mm-hmm.
which never hurts.
That's a pretty compelling case.
It is.
However, we also need to consider the stock's current valuation.
Mm-hmm.
As we mentioned earlier, the RSI is quite high, indicating that it might be overbought.
Right.
So patience might be key here.
Exactly. If you're a long-term investor who can stomach some short-term volatility,
Mm-hmm.
VeriSign might be a great addition to your portfolio. But if you're more risk-averse,
Okay.
you might want to wait for a more attractive entry point or consider diversifying your investments.
That's a great point.
Yeah,
It all comes down to your individual investment strategy and comfort level with risk.
exactly.
So while there's a lot to be excited about with VeriSign,
Mm-hmm.
it's important to be aware of the potential for short-term price fluctuations.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But before we get into that further, let's take a quick step back
Okay,
and talk a bit more about VeriSign's business model.
sounds good.
Welcome back to Investing Talk podcast. Before the break, we were discussing the potential impact of Web3 and the metaverse on VeriSign.
Yes, these are certainly intriguing trends that could reshape the internet as we know it.
Absolutely. And as we mentioned, VeriSign isn't just standing still. They're actively exploring these technologies. Could you elaborate on that a bit more? What are some specific ways they could leverage their expertise in a decentralized future?
Well, one possibility is that VeriSign could adapt its domain name system to work within a blockchain environment.
Okay.
They could potentially become a registrar for blockchain-based domain names, providing a bridge between the traditional internet and the decentralized web.
So instead of just managing .com and .net domains, they could expand into managing domain names for decentralized applications and platforms.
That's one scenario. Another possibility is that they could leverage their security expertise
Right.
to provide trust and verification services within the metaverse. As virtual worlds become more complex and interconnected, ensuring the authenticity of digital identities and assets will be crucial.
Mm-hmm.
VeriSign, with its long history of providing security solutions for the internet,
Right.
could be well positioned to play a role in this space.
That's a really interesting point. They're not just a domain name company. They're a security company at their core.
Right.
And that expertise could become even more valuable in a decentralized world where trust and security are paramount.
Precisely. Their deep understanding of cryptography and digital certificates could be applied to a wide range of use cases in Web3 and the metaverse.
I mean, so they have some potential avenues for growth and adaptation. But what about the risks? What are some things that could negatively impact VeriSign's business in this evolving landscape?
Well, one obvious risk is that the adoption of Web3 and the metaverse might not happen as quickly or as broadly as some predict.
Right.
These are still emerging technologies,
Right.
and there's no guarantee that they'll become mainstream. If they remain niche, VeriSign's investments in these areas might not pay off.
That's a fair point. It's always risky to bet on unproven technologies. Are there any other potential threats they should be mindful of?
Another risk is competition.
Okay.
While VeriSign enjoys a dominant position in the traditional domain name system,
Right.
the decentralized web could give rise to alternative naming services that don't rely on their infrastructure.
Interesting.
Startups and established tech companies are already experimenting with new ways to manage and resolve domain names on the blockchain.
So they could face more competition than they're accustomed to?
Potentially, the decentralized nature of Web3 could make it more difficult for any single company to establish the same level of dominance that VeriSign currently enjoys.
That's a crucial consideration for investors. Even with their strong track record, they can't afford to become complacent.
Exactly. They need to stay agile and innovative to maintain their relevance in a rapidly changing technological landscape.
Okay, so we've covered the potential opportunities and risks associated with Web3 and the metaverse.
Mm-hmm.
Let's shift our focus back to their core business,
Sure.
managing .com and .net domains. We know they have a near monopoly in this space, which is a huge advantage. But what about the regulatory landscape? Could changes in regulations or government policies pose a threat to their business model?
It's certainly something to keep in mind. VeriSign operates under contracts with the U.S. government and ICANN,
ICANN?
the Global Internet Governance Organization. These contracts give them the right to manage .com and .net domains, but they are subject to renewal and potential modifications.
So there's a possibility that future agreements could be less favorable to VeriSign?
It's not impossible. Governments and regulatory bodies around the world are increasingly interested in issues like internet governance and cybersecurity.
Mm-hmm.
There's always a chance that they could introduce new regulations or policies that could impact VeriSign's business model.
Okay.
For example, they could face pressure to lower prices or open up competition in the domain name market.
Right, their current pricing power might not be guaranteed forever. It sounds like investors need to keep a close eye on the regulatory landscape as well as technological advancements.
Absolutely. Regulatory changes can have a significant impact on businesses, especially those operating in critical infrastructure industries like the internet.
Okay, so we've explored VeriSign's business model, their financials, their potential opportunities and risks in a decentralized future, and even touched on regulatory considerations. Is there anything else investors should consider when evaluating this company?
One final aspect to consider is VeriSign's valuation.
Okay.
While their strong fundamentals and growth prospects justify a premium valuation, it's important to assess whether the current stock price accurately reflects their intrinsic value.
Right. Even the best company could become a bad investment if you pay too much for the stock.
Exactly. As we discussed earlier, the stock's RSI suggests that it might be overbought in the short term.
Mm-hmm.
Investors need to carefully consider whether the current price adequately accounts for both the company's strengths and potential risks.
So even though VeriSign has a lot going for it, it's essential to be mindful of valuation and avoid getting caught up in hype.
Precisely. It's crucial to approach every investment with a balanced and informed perspective.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. We've explored VeriSign's business model, financials, growth prospects, potential risks, and even touched on regulatory considerations and valuation. It's been a very insightful conversation, but before we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with a thought-provoking question.
I always enjoy a good thought-provoking question.
All right, here it is. Given VeriSign's dominant position in internet infrastructure, how might the increasing focus on data privacy and online security shape their future role and responsibilities?
That's an excellent question. As governments and individuals become more concerned about protecting their data online, companies like VeriSign, which play a central role in internet infrastructure,
Right.
will likely face increasing scrutiny and pressure to ensure the security and privacy of user information.
Right. Their role might expand beyond just managing domain names to encompass broader responsibilities related to data protection and online trust.
It's certainly a possibility they could potentially become stewards of digital identity and play a more active role in combating cybercrime and protecting user privacy.
It'll be interesting to see how they navigate this evolving landscape and what role they choose to play in shaping the future of the internet. But for now, that's all the time we have for this episode of Investing Talk Podcast.
It's been a pleasure discussing this fascinating company with you.
Likewise, and to all our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into VeriSign. We hope you found it informative and insightful.
And we encourage you to continue exploring this company and the broader trends shaping the future of the internet.
As always, remember to do your own research, consult with a financial advisor, and make investment decisions that align with your own individual goals and risk tolerance.
And we'd love to hear your thoughts on VeriSign. Do you see them as a solid long-term investment, or are you hesitant given the potential risks?
Feel free to share your insights and opinions on our social media channels. And while you're there, don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave us a comment. We always appreciate hearing from our listeners.
Until next time, happy investing.
Welcome back to Investing Talk Podcast. We've spent this episode discussing VeriSign ticker symbol VRSNN. As we wrap up, let's touch on one final aspect that often gets overlooked when analyzing companies.
Oh, okay. What's that?
Their environmental, social, and governance, or ESG factors.
Right.
In today's investment landscape, ESG considerations are becoming increasingly important for investors who want to align their portfolios with their values.
Absolutely. Investors are definitely more and more scrutinizing companies' environmental impact, social responsibility, and corporate governance practices.
Exactly. So how does VeriSign stack up in terms of ESG?
Well, VeriSign has actually made some notable strides in recent years to improve its ESG performance.
Okay.
For example, they've implemented initiatives to reduce their carbon footprint, promote diversity and inclusion in the workforce, and enhance their corporate governance practices.
That's encouraging to hear. Are there any specific examples you can share?
Certainly. They've invested in renewable energy sources to power their data centers.
Okay.
And they've set targets to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. They've also established programs to support STEM education for underrepresented groups. And they've adopted a more robust code of ethics for their board of directors.
It sounds like they're making a conscious effort to operate in a more sustainable and responsible manner.
They are, and their efforts have been recognized by several ESG rating agencies.
Okay.
MSCI, for example, has given VeriSign an A rating for its ESG performance,
Wow.
which places it among the top companies in its industry.
That's impressive. So for investors who prioritize ESG factors, VeriSign seems to be a company that's worth considering.
Yes, their commitment to ESG adds another layer of appeal to their already strong investment case.
Well, folks, there you have it. We've explored VeriSign from its dominant market position and impressive financials to the potential impact of emerging technologies and the growing importance of ESG factors. It's been a comprehensive journey, and we hope you've gained valuable insights along the way.
Remember, investing is a personal journey, and it's essential to do your own research, consider your individual goals and risk tolerance, and make informed decisions.
And as always, if you have any questions or thoughts, we'd love to hear from you. You can connect with us on social media or leave a comment on our website.
Don't forget to subscribe to Investing Talk Podcast and share this episode with anyone who might find it valuable.
That's it for today's show. Until next time, happy investing, everyone.